Welcome to our presentation, Resisting EdTech Colonialism Through Inclusive Innovation in Kentucky Appalachia. This is an overview of our presentation. We'll begin with a land acknowledgement and some background information. And number 6, the attempts to resist colonialism or EdTech, what we call EdTech colonialism and progress updates is kind of the meat of the presentation. And we'll have some concluding remarks and questions.
So we wanted to start with a land acknowledgement. We work with 2 districts, one in Pikeville, Kentucky, and one in Floyd County, Kentucky. And Indigenous people have always lived on the land that is now called Kentucky and continue to live there today. The 2012 census recorded 31,335 Native Americans living in Kentucky. The place now called Kentucky is primarily Shawnee, Cherokee, Chickasaw, and Osage land. Many Native peoples are at the forefront of fighting for environmental justice and protection of lands. And in Kentucky, honoring these struggles can look like many things, including protecting the water quality of the Ohio River and resisting extraction sites like the failed Kinder Morgan pipeline. To center Indigenous stewardship, resistance, and knowledge and combating erasure, there are several organizations working in Kentucky, and those are linked in this slide.
For the past 2 years, the 5 of us here have been working together to try to train K-8 teachers in Eastern Kentucky and Kentucky Appalachia in computational thinking and computer science, and trying to help them integrate what they've learned into their classrooms. You can read some of our perspectives in this slide, and I'll add that the Traci Tackett is based in Eastern Kentucky, Aileen Owens is based in Pennsylvania, and the rest of us, Quinn, Pati, and myself, are based in California. A little bit about Eastern Kentucky and Kentucky Appalachia. So you can see in the map the whole colored scheme in the top, that is Appalachia. And Eastern Kentucky is in Central Appalachia, and we're really in the east part of Central Kentucky, where Floyd and Pikeville are the 2 districts that we're working with. There is a distinct culture and a very varied culture that it's a mountain culture, and we're learning more and more about it, those of us who are from California and not native to Eastern Kentucky. And we're learning that that kinship is a really, really important aspect. There is a strong respect and love of place in the mountains. Egalitarianism and individualism and independence are all very prized. And there is a religious worldview. I think historically it's mostly of a Protestant, independent and Protestant view that is there. And of course, there is, as anywhere else, there's a lot of shifts and changes and variation within that culture as well. That's important to keep in mind. Important context in Eastern Kentucky is that the coal industry was really a central part of the economy, and that has gone away in the past several years. And so computer science and entrepreneurship is being considered as a possible new way of survival for that region. And that is why computational thinking and computer science education has gotten some attention and is considered important, not just for the just to align with the standards, but really for the school and the local community, the greater community in general. And so the way we have gotten together is that a couple of educational leaders, including Traci Tackett and the district leaders, and Aileen Owens in Pennsylvania, they kind of bonded together around workforce development through computer science education. And then they invited us at Digital Promise as researchers to help design a K-8 computational thinking pathway through a grant. And so we wrote a grant, we got it, and we've been working together for over 2 years.
So first, we want to acknowledge that colonialism is a powerful term with significant historical context. The National Geographic described colonialism as occurring when one nation subjugates another, conquering its population and exploiting it, while often forcing its own language and cultural values upon its people. And by using the term colonialism, we do not mean to imply that it is the same as what's happened in a global context. Our intent is not to co-opt the term. What we think about when we say edtech colonialism is we refer to the elements that make technology and edtech spaces less open to equitable participation by people, particularly those from Black, Latinx, Indigenous communities, in addition to women. And so we want to acknowledge that edtech has its own language and culture that it aims to promote, and that edtech has great economic and political clout, particularly in the United States, but also around the world, and that the cultural and values currently promoted by edtech companies are fairly monolithic. And we want to make sure to acknowledge that, and to acknowledge that things like this move fast and break things quote that you see here on this slide with Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook standing in front of it, have led to some issues with technology and participation in technology, specifically what tech companies call unintended consequence of the use of their technologies, but that some of us from a more critical perspective refer to as unanticipated consequences. If we're moving fast, we're not anticipating the potential consequences. So that is what we mean by edtech colonialism, and we'll talk more throughout the presentation about some issues, specifically in education in Kentucky.
We wanted to know how our research practice partnership has attempted to resist edtech colonialism and how well that effort has gone. So it's a very self-reflective type of exercise. And in terms of how we tried to do that is, actually we had, again, 2 years ago when we started, we had a conversation. How are we going to do this? Is this a problem? And how are we going to do this? And we identified 3 main ways that we will try to resist what we call edtech colonialism. And one of them is to say we're going to make sure student agency is core to what we do. And then that Eastern Kentucky leads the pathway development. It's not Digital Promise leading it. It's not Pennsylvania leading it. It's the Eastern Kentucky folks leading it. And also competencies first, as in we want to make sure we're promoting the valuable competencies in education over themes like STEAM or project-based learning and tools like Scratch or Ozobots. What we want to focus is the competencies and centering those. So those were the 3 ways that we thought we would be doing this resistance. And so going back to that, and then now we're going through meeting notes, we're looking at the surveys from the teachers that went through professional development, and also looking at videos and observations of the professional learning events, which we've had 2 rounds of so far, 2 big rounds of so far.
And in terms of where we're at right now, going right off of what Emmy was talking about, our sort of 3 pillars, at the outset of the project, we really made sure that districts articulated what their vision is for CS, computer science education on the K through 8 level, and how they saw it integrating with their ongoing efforts. One of the things that we did early on with the team was have them participate in a script reflective exercise, which was a multi-day exercise that Ms. Tackett ran with the Pikeville and Floyd teams. SCRIPT, as you see there, stands for Strategic CS for All Resource and Implementation Planning Tool. But this was a very district-focused articulation of why are we doing this. It's not so much at Silicon Valley or any other organization is letting us know what our vision is. It's something that is going to be internalized within the district leads to teachers in the wider community. Soft ways that we've reinforced that. We consistently in our monthly and weekly meetings been always focusing on the district pathway, the district grant, and how they wanted to roll that out for their schools and their classrooms. We train teachers through teacher leaders. Ms. Aileen Owens, who Emmy introduced, those initial slides, has been leading the professional development. We haven't outsourced this to a separate company, but rather relied on the school district in Pennsylvania, South Fayette School District, who would do the training for Kentucky teachers. So teachers were connecting with teachers around real lessons and talking about stuff that they actually already had done with their students. What do we have in terms of evidence? Well, right now we have our SCRIPT value statement for each of the districts, and this is something that they will return to and further reflect upon how these values changed, how these goals furthered over the 3 years of the grant. And to date, we have a total of 72 lesson plans submitted from a total of 50 K-8 teachers. So we see great enthusiasm based off the professional development we're offering. It is important to note, and this will come up later, that these were lesson plans that were focused on integrating the competencies within existing subject matter like language arts and mathematics. So they weren't standalone activities that were tacked on for these classrooms, but rather purposed to be integrated in what was already offering within the schools. There are threats. That third header, the fact is that school districts across the country, Eastern Kentucky districts are no exception to this, are faced with many different initiatives. And as anybody knows in the education world, there is constant turnover in initiatives. Something takes hold for a year or two and then is passed over for something else. Some of this is reflective in changes in leadership, shifts in priorities, but this is something that we're also very mindful of, and it is only more salient now that we are still in this COVID pandemic. Competencies or tools, I mean, touched upon this, and I'm not going to focus too much, but the notion is that we really are about preparing students around these wider ideas that underpin things like computational thinking, working with data, understanding models, being able to grasp what we mean by an algorithm and see how algorithms function in day-to-day life. The PD has focused on those competencies and been tied to Kentucky state standards, both in technology and computer science. But as I said in the previous slide, trying to integrate that into existing subject matter. So it's not a tacked on element for these schools, for these teachers, for these students. 51 of the 72 lesson plans have integrated into existing academic classes. That's something we're proud of. We're currently looking at those 51 and trying to emphasize what they're doing particularly well as looking at the other 21 and finding why have those teachers not found those integrative points to date, and what can we do to support them. As always, there's threats. Competencies, implementations are very broad, nebulous, lack accessible assessments. When you talk to teachers about algorithms, they don't necessarily immediately know what you're talking about. So there's a lot of unpacking that needs to go on there before they can actually distill it into integrative class practices within their own classroom.
As Emmy said previously, student agency is core to this work, and we're attempting to center student agency by designing professional development, or PD, that focuses on student meaning making. We see evidence of student agency through the lesson plans that teachers have submitted, as well as the pedagogies that they indicate in those lesson plans that include project-based learning and other constructivist learning approaches. Some of the threats here are that we need to acknowledge are subscriptions to skill building curricula or other fixed curricula that might not center student agency, as well as pandemic funding going towards needing to be used quickly and often going to devices and subscriptions and fixed curricula.
In addition to the 3 different ways of trying to resist edtech colonialism, we realized there was a fourth way that we've also been using, and this is thanks to the CREA community. Really, we've had Dr. Stafford Hood as an advisor for all this time and continues to be so. And in our proposal was always trying to be culturally responsive. Likewise, Hobart Harmon has deep expertise in Appalachia and STEM education, and it's been really great to have him as advisor. Our project also studied, our project team, and then had really studied Community Cultural Wealth Model by Yoso 2005. And we spent a good 3 sessions really looking at the different kinds of cultural wealth and then thinking about each one, how it applies or doesn't apply necessarily to our context. And also there were 3 C's for CS pathways: curricula, competencies, and credentialing, I think were the 3. And then we added culturally responsive as the 4th one. This is a little bit into the curriculum, so that, those were our attempts to keep this forth in the top of our mind. And we held a panel discussion with 4 local educators / leaders from Kentucky to talk about community cultural wealth at a recent conference. And it was really enlightening to hear kind of the thoughtfulness behind it. And then another piece that we were really pleased to see was that one of the discussants did a keynote to the teachers this summer, a keynote presentation, and he featured 8 or 9 different technology initiatives that were all about local folks creating a new business in order to sustain the local culture. That was really really interesting and eye-opening, at least to me, and I think for a lot of the teachers, the local teachers as well. And we have realized that some of the threats to being culturally responsive has been some of the new tech standards that are more focused on skills and a little less emphasizing the cultural sustainability. And there's also the accountability and test-driven climate that prevents teachers from adopting new lessons and thinking more widely kind of about their culture and their students' culture. So in conclusion, we think that naming threats of edtech colonialism and planning specific strategies to try to resist it has been useful for our project. It was also interesting to think about our threats and realize that actually the threats to culturally sustaining CS education doesn't just come from edtech company pressure, as at least I was initially thinking about this. It also comes from our own perceived need for efficiency, like I need results fast, or this district needs results fast, so let's adopt this curriculum that's already here. And also, I think some of the way that educational systems are structured, like how we budget and how we need to spend out funding by the end of the year, or how there's accountability towards state standards that are, and these kinds of things cause some tensions and threats to being culturally sustaining. Quinn, you want to say something?
Yeah, and I think, just framing this wider conversation around the national crosswords as the team came together on this presentation. I think that a lot of the presentations at CREA are also focusing on what is the future of education, what is the future of work. What was once called remote work is now just becoming more commonplace within certain areas as just work itself. One of the things that is going on here, and I think is especially relevant for rural communities, is are these communities going to be able to sustain themselves with their capacity to do more remote access on the national front? No longer is it a matter of moving to coastal cities, large cities, as the sole place for high-paying work. So the future of work and the future of schooling are tied hand in hand. And I think our modest project here over the 3 years in Eastern Kentucky speaks to some of these ongoing changes that the whole country is facing right now.
Have some parting questions for you. We look forward to the discussion, and you can contact us anytime to discuss further. Thank you.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you for listening. And yeah, any thoughts, questions, advice?
No, thank you. No, that was very interesting. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. And yeah, no, just it was, yeah, no, thank you for sharing.
Jeff, any thoughts? No, you're in the ed tech world. You live in the ed tech world.
It's interesting. There was a session yesterday, like maybe I don't know if this came up for you at all in your work, but there was a session yesterday in our panel. If you remember I think someone presented something, or maybe I'm mixing it with like a class I took recently. We talked about jumping a digital evolution. So an example that we've seen in like African countries is they move directly from no phones whatsoever in some regions to having cell phones with internet access, and completely skipped the phase of having a landline or any sort of installed phone infrastructure. Is that something that still exists in regions of the United States? I'm thinking particularly about the region that you were working with. Is that type of digital divide still there? And is there still untapped opportunities in terms of access from a technology access perspective?
That's a really interesting question, Jeff. Well, I do know that I think broadband, Kentucky was the first state in the country for all the schools to have broadband access. So they are quite ahead of the curve in that kind of way. And with regards to I'm not sure. I wonder, Pati, if you have any thoughts is there any sense of jumping that's happening?
Or maybe what you're describing actually was the jump, the sense that maybe there was a lack of infrastructure and there was an intentional push for broadband, at least for the school infrastructure. I don't know if like a schooling at home or remote learning exacerbated the issue, like is broadband that present for the families in their own homes, or if it's something that only is pervasive in the schools.
Yeah, home access, I don't really know much about. The jump that I feel could be there in some ways is because rural districts don't get that much attention relative to urban districts. And I think a lot of urban districts have gone through so many iterations of reform, one after another. Whereas I feel like with the districts we're working, where they're at least one of them, there's kind of they haven't gone through that much. There's not as much initiative fatigue. And so they didn't get the older versions of like very initial, CSCT thing. They're going like their standards, their district standards, this is a case where have recently changed from like very old school. This is how you use a spreadsheet. This is, how you use Microsoft Word or something to ISTE standards. And so maybe there is something like that is just based on the fact that rural is less accessible and has had less attention. What do you think, Pati?
Makes sense. I wonder how much experience parents of the students in the districts are working with when it comes to being able to support their students and kind of complement or supplement the work that they're doing in school with these technologies. But we haven't been working too much with teachers and students. We're working more at the district level. And so what we hear is more from the district administrators who are currently also juggling so many other things, including recent closures and last minute changes and new curriculum. And so I don't think we've dug into that issue as much, Jeff.
Now, I have to say, though, they are rural, but Pikeville, one of the schools, it's like a small city. They have a university, they have a hospital, and it's kind of a little bit of a hub that is different from the rest of the landscape. And so their students, it's a small district, but their students are students of professionals and the professors and doctors and in the area, and they also draw from outside as well. So it's very different than two districts that are very much cut off from infrastructure like that. And it was so eye-opening to visit and important to visit, because I think I had some I really didn't have an idea of what that might look like. And then when I went to the schools, I was very impressed to see there was a lot of initiatives in that were CT focused, CT and STEAM focused, that had been ongoing. And any other thoughts, comments? Well, I think we can go on to enjoy the rest of our afternoon/evening. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.